pox and shingles. So pox viruses. You can see herpes. That's all just basically pictures of gross diseases. Okay, nervous system. So we have, it's basically divided into two basic parts: central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So CNS and the PNS. Okay? So you have brain, cerebellum, cerebrium, and the brainstem. And then that's spinal cord, all part of your central nervous system. Versus then you have all of the stuff that comes off of it. So the nerve ganglia, the spinal ganglia, the nerve plexus spinal ganglia, the different nerves, axons, those are all part of the peripheral. So central, major section, it's not in the center, it's periphery of the center, peripheral of the system. Okay? So there are, but you have just looking through, you know, kind of know what the brain and spinal nervous system is, right? I mean, and you mess this up, and it causes massive damage to, as it goes through your entire body. And if it's affecting your nerves, it's going to be very painful. Oh my God. So the brain has several parts. You have the cerebellum, controls the voluntary muscles, perception, and thinking. So, you know, when you go to try and open the door, it's your shrink. The cerebellum is controlling the involuntary muscles. So unless you're actually thinking about it, every time you breathe, or more specifically like your heart beating, those are things you don't control. They're involuntary. The body just does it. There's a really bad blonde joke that she had headphones on, couldn't take them off. They're telling her to breathe in and breathe out. We don't need that. It does it for us. And then we have a brainstem. So this is where you have your heart rate and blood pressure and breathing and the more of the animalistic stuff. So the spinal cord extends to the brainstem. And you get it. It goes all the way down to the lumbar region. Versus our periphery. So this is where you have your nerves that command from the central nervous system to the muscles and glands. You need a way to tell, for your brain to tell the rest of your body what to do. And they extend through special holes in the cranial bones. So you have your cranial nerves going through the cranial bones. And your spinal nerves extend from the spinal cord through vertebral gaps. So you can have sensory nerves, motor nerves, or mixed nerves. And so the idea is, are the sensory nerves that are carrying signals towards your central nervous system, because if something's hot, you need to get that message from your fingertips back up. Or if they're motor nerves, your brain has to send a signal saying, or you have to have a signal sent saying, move your hand away from the fire. So you have to have both sensory and motor. And then mixed nerves will carry signals back and forth. There is no normal microbiota in the central nervous system. Pathogens may access it though, and that's when they break into bones and in the meninges. So medical procedures can also break it in, but usually there are no, native microbiota there.
On the CNS or PNS?
In the central.
In the central. Okay. Bacterial diseases of the nervous system. They aren't there normally, so anything that gets in there is not good. Bacteria can cause disease in two ways. You can infect cells of the nervous system, or it can grow somewhere else and release toxins that affect neurons. Okay, so meningitis, leprosy, these are things that actually infect cells of the nervous system, versus botulism, tetanus, which are releasing toxins. So, bacterial meningitis. Meningitis is the inflammation of the meninges, the tissue that surrounds the brain and spinal cord. Signs and symptoms: you have stiff neck, severe headaches, nausea, drowsiness, coma. Overall, not really a good thing to have. bacterial pathogens. So we have a bunch of pathogens in these chapters. So accessory meningitis, gram-negative diplococcus. So what I'm going to do for this exam is I'm going to put a list of these so that way you have to be able to recognize and maybe can go back and fill things in, but you don't have to know how to spell things. Sound more
So you mean know like the name, the scientific name, and what it is, like meningitis?
Yeah, that it.
Okay.
Yeah. So that way you have a list of what are these pathogens we've been talking about, just so that way you're not stumped on a name, because these are, yeah, that's not fair. Okay. But it's gram-negative. So if it's gram-negative, well, what does that mean it's going to be doing? Is it endotoxin, exotoxin? What is it?
Gram-negative.
It's gram-negative.
Endo.
Okay. So, this causes meningococcal meningitis. A lot of times you can get the streptococcal pneumonia, leading cause of meningitis in adults, or you can have the streptococcus agalactic, so leading cause among newborns. So with this, so if it's leading cause among newborns, this is what you're going to be getting during birth, versus having streptococcus pneumonia. The leading cause of meningitis, this is actually found in 75% of human throats. It's not something that you can just get from breathing, so it's not something we have to really worry about. Listeria is rarely pathogenic to adults. Most of the time it's susceptible to pregnant women, and they get this via contaminated food. One of the fears is that meningitis can become epidemic. You know, if it starts really mutating or getting out there and spreading, and you get that bad batch of food, it can start, you can spread it multiple ways. Mycoses. Mycoses are fungal diseases. You can kind of look at that name and make sense, right? So, spread from the lungs to the central nervous system via the blood. So for anyone who thought mushrooms were a fun trip, you are having toxins that do produce hallucinations, but they can also lead to neurological problems. And they may also produce fungal meningitis. So it's one of those dangerous things to be playing with. Fungal meningitis, otherwise known as cryptococcal meningitis. Signs and symptoms are very similar to bacterial meningitis. Cryptococcus neoformans is usually the causative agent, and there are 2 varieties of the yeast found worldwide. What's kind of scary is the Cryptococcus neoformans is found in bird droppings, it's found in soil, it's a very common yeast. And this wasn't really an issue until we started making so much of the population immunosuppressant. So with all of the having, people who either don't have an immune system due to a disease or are suppressing their immune system due to a transplant, this is now one of the common secondary infections. And so you're starting to see this more and more, especially with AIDS patients. Okay? And one of the problems is that this can resist phagocytosis by defensive cells. The infection follows inhalation of the spores or dry yeast cells and occurs in terminal AIDS patients and transplant recipients. That's where you really see it. It's that secondary infection. Diagnosis, you got to try and find it early, and you can treat it with some antifungal drugs. So, pretty pictures. Cryptococcal neoformans, one of the reasons why they can evade being phagocytosed is that's the cell. That's its capsid layer.
Wow.
It's protected, okay? And then one of the scary things about Cryptococcus neoformans is that it can get past the blood-brain barrier and is found in patients with cryptococcal meningitis, and so this is somebody's brain with yeast edema syndrome. So really not a pleasant way to go. Viral diseases are much more readily to cross that blood-brain barrier. I mean, that blood-brain barrier is pretty tight for a reason. So not usually much can cross it. So that's why having cocciform be able to is kind of noteworthy. But viruses do it easier than other things. They're smaller. And also viral diseases occur more frequently than bacterial or fungal infections. I mean, we're talking about meningitis, polio, rabies, encephalitis. These are all things that are more viral based. So you can also get viral meningitis, which has signs and symptoms similar to that of bacteria, but usually they're a little bit milder, bacterial or fungal. And so you can see that as a doctor, this kind of gets confusing because here you can have bacterial, fungal, or viral meningitis. They all kind of look the same. And so you have to really be able, this is where you have to do some culturing and testing to figure out what are we dealing with. Because you can't use antifungals or antibiotics on a virus. You know, so you want to be able to pick the right treatment depending on what's actually causing the problem. So 90% of cases caused by the viruses are homogeneous enterovirus, and a lot of times it damages cells in the meninges, okay? And triggers the meningitis. There's no specific treatment due to the fact that the virus causes some issues. Arboreal encephalitis. So this is inflammation of the brain, okay? So an example that we're all probably familiar with, West Nile virus. We've been hearing it for years. So arboreovirus, it's a virus spread by arthropods such as mosquitoes. So, and things that they're very specific different kinds of mosquitoes, which you don't, we all just hear, oh, mosquitoes are bad, but there's actually different branches of mosquitoes that carry different viruses. So it's different species are responsible for different diseases. So the Culex mosquito is the one responsible for the West Nile, and its natural host is bird, which makes it what kind of disease?
Disease.
Zoonosis. Okay, and the thing is with this, you typically, most people who have West Nile have very mild cold-like symptoms, but they can ramp it up and end up becoming meningitis.
Oh, zoonosis.
So it's one of those things where it's a zoonotic diseases. They rarely affect humans, but when they do, they start becoming even worse. And since it can cross that blood-brain barrier, it's why it's capable of causing meningitis. And the basic way of trying to prevent this is prevent getting bitten by a mosquito. But they do have vaccines from horses that they've worked out, so that way we can at least try to stop some of the vectors and it being spread. Okay, so West Nile virus transmission, the mosquito, the vector, it likes to harbor in birds and it can go back and forth. Humans and horses tend to be the dead end recipients of it, where we're the ones who end up having the actual disease. Human West Nile virus encephalitis in the United States, so when we're looking at what are the actual reported cases versus what are the deaths. So that's one of the things you have to remember when you hear all these news stories, and they go, oh my God, there's a huge outbreak. Yes, there is, and it's one of those things you gotta be worried about, disease-wise, but you're also like, really, how many people are really, is this really affecting? And a lot of times, because with media, it leads, you get overinflation of some things. And so with these, you have to look at, okay, what are the actual numbers? What are we worried about? Who's getting infected? Is this really something to worry about? How can we stop it? So always try to be more level-headed and think, how can we stop it? How bad is this? Botulism. Clostridium botulinum. So it's common in soil and water bacteria. We all know it as Botox, but it's intoxicating. It's poison formed by the botulinum toxin. So it makes an actual toxin. Sometimes, most commonly where we would come in contact with it is improperly canned food ends up having botulism. But it's the spores that are germinating in that improperly canned food. And so that bacteria multiplies, produces the botulism toxin, and it's not good. But botulinum toxin will interfere with the motor neurons. It blocks muscle contraction. So you kind of get this flaccid paralysis because you can't really move or lift anything. Okay. Also, you get blurred vision, progressive paralysis, including respiratory paralysis, which is kind of leads to death. You can't breathe. And so you can, usually you can get the most common is the foodborne botulism. There is infant botulism. You can get it through a wound. There are, antibodies specifically to target botulism. So it's one of those things where if you catch it, you treat it, and you can, recover. It'll take time, but depending on how severe a case, it is treatable. And the prevention is destroy the endospores in food. And we all know how hard it is to destroy endospores. So. Another one's tetanus. So Clostridium tetani produces a neurotoxin. So this is widely distributed in soil. And so it's those endospores. They get deposited deep in a wound. And then they decide that they like their new environment, they germinate, and they start producing tetanus toxin. Okay? So it's interfering with the motor neurons. The toxin blocks muscle relaxation. So this is, instead of being flaccid paralysis, you get a very rigid paralysis. This is where you end up having, so really tight because all of your muscles contract. So this is where they also have, the lock jaw, the spasms, the contractions. They spread to other muscles. And so the difference between being loose or having all of your muscles tighten all at once. The disease is characterized by uncontrollable contractions of the muscle. The sign is that tightening of the jaw and neck muscles, lock jaw. It's often fatal among untreated patients. So get treatment, but this is one of those things that we get vaccinated for regularly. Was it the PDAPT or something, that vaccine? Diphtheria, tetanus, or something else in there, besides what we talked about.
DTaP.
Yeah, so that's one of the other, MMR and PDAPT are one of the two common booster vaccines. So there's, to treat it, you can give tetanus immunoglobulins, so the antibodies against it. We also do active immunization. Okay. And the DTaP vaccine, the booster shot's given about every 10 years, or they like to give them now because they add the whooping cough. Like, oh, you should get it again. And those really hurt. For some reason, that vaccine really hurts. Well, compared to others. Polio. It's a polio virus. Usually, people are asymptomatic with polio.
Without symptoms.
But there are some that start getting the fever, the headache, sore throat, and there's even more, or even less, that can get the non-paralytic polio, so it spreads to your central nervous system, meninges, and causes back pain and muscle spasms, and then less than 2% actually get it to spread to the spinal cord and the motor cortex of the brain and result in paralysis. And so, depending on what it is and the treatment, it's time sensitive of how much you can actually get treated for this. It's most often transmitted through drinking water. Okay, so you get the deterioration of the affected muscles, and one of the things is that it can happen much later in life, post-polio syndrome. Okay, so you have have a famous president who had polio when he was a kid. So later in life, you start getting some of the symptoms of having this as a child. So the muscle atrophy, in the original affected areas, there's no virus present, but this results from the original neurological damage. So currently we're doing active immunization against this. We have an inactive polio vaccine versus the oral polio vaccine. The thing is that the chance of the vaccine-associated paralytic polio is 1 in 2.4 million. So, I mean, it's still really low odds. But that's why we started coming out the inactivated one, because we kind of want to try and be safer if we can. We don't want things that revert. Because of these vaccines, we have a much lower amount of polio in the world. So if you look at what polio looks like, 20-year difference, less. So this is what vaccinations can do, is you can severely limit the number or the spread. And then closer to today, 2012, you can see that polio is really just kind of in small groups. You get this wild polio virus, okay? So you're really just, we're looking at endemic countries, you know, where we're probably not being able to vaccinate, and so that's where it's being able to still reside. Rabies, caused by the rabies virus. And disease condition, so it's a long incubation period. And then it's going to infect the nerve cells and multiplies extensively in brain tissue. Actually not a good thing. So you get the fever, the headaches, the muscle aches, the sore throat, fatigue, the nervous disorder, and it ends up with painful throat spasms and a coma leading to death. So predominantly, where are we seeing rabies in the U.S.? It's in animals. And so for us, this is why we stay away from skunks. Besides, if you hit them with your car, it really smells.
Multiple reasons.
Multiple reasons. Or you really smell if you're running across a skunk. But you know, also, if you get bitten, there's a high chance that it's got rabies. They are reservoirs. What is a reservoir?
It contains the bacteria or
Place where pathogen can hide out. Okay? So, what are the wildlife reservoirs for rabies in the U.S.? So, if you're planning a trip, quick note, what do you want to avoid, or avoid in
should get
general?
rid of that skunk in the backyard. He shows up every once in a while. The
Treatment. There are vaccinations against rabies. One of those where you can actually, you know, given the immunoglobulins, you can get the inactivated version. And so this is where they'll actually start giving you the antibodies, so you don't, you know, they'll make it so that you have to make your antibodies, but they'll also give you antibodies so you can start to fight it off. If you're too late to intervene when symptoms occur, it can induce coma. And there are some antiviral drugs that have been successful, but otherwise, you know, when symptoms start, it's really kind of, you should have gone to the doctor sooner. I mean, it's why usually, if you've been bitten by something that might have had rabies, they usually start the treatment. Because by the time you can figure out if you actually do have it or not, it's a little too late for some of these. So it's better to be preventive than after the fact. And there you go. There's chapter 20.